It's 6 o'clock in London, it's 1 p.m. in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 3 a.m. in Sydney, 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings! Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you are today. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID live stream, Series 15, Episode 3, Episode number 87, part 1 of our spectacular review of the year starts here. So it's a packed program tonight. We're now on the annual review of our 2022 IPO-VID guests who have shared their insights and knowledge on the world of exchanges, blockchain and cryptocurrency during the course of the last 12 months. We had in total no fewer than 40 guests over 35 shows, including 4 of which were co-hosted by the wonderful carbon genius Steve Zwick. This was the year, of course, in the exchange world, which began with COVID in decline and NSE under investigation for all manner of curious interactions, and ended with the former management of the National Stock Exchange of India in jail, while over in the USA, the most shocking revelation of the year remains that when you apparently steal $8 billion, including passing a few $100 million straight through to buy property in the Bahamas, not only don't you get instantly arrested, but in fact, the chairman of the House Finance Committee sends you rather fawning notes on Twitter, inviting you to come to Washington, D.C. In many respects, 2022 was a year of the weird. But as the Northern Hemisphere hits midwinter, so too crypto winter has an icy grasp on the new thing about which there was still so much optimism as recently as last year. Crypto or digital asset version 2.0 will appear in due course, methinks, and move things forward. But for now, it looks like we're all sitting around trying to work out which crypto entity is the next Humpty Dumpty. Over in the established parish, of course, the Australian Stock Exchange was forced to eat humble pie this week in the Australian Parliament. It was nonetheless a good year for the established parish, even if the up-and-coming ranks in the crypto world are limping out of the year in what might be described as duress or anguish. To which end, if you want to understand where the exchange world is going next year, if you want to be on the back of the bandwagon, which actually was pointing out the fact that we had serious questions about things like FTX, good grief, almost 6 months or more ago, you need to read the trusty newsletter of the Bourse Business, the exchange of information, Exchange Invest. Oh yes, it's all very well, you might say, for you, that's your business. You might as well say this. So let me have somebody else comment about this. Here is Trabu Bland, Uber Futures Exchange boss of all intercontinental exchange venues, talking about what I will proudly say is a great advertisement for Exchange Invest, speaking at Boca Raton's conference earlier this year for the futures industry. Here's the Exchange Invest advantage. Take it away, Trabu.
In a shirt to be an outside person. So it's an honor to be here. So I just want to make a slight plug here is that everyone at ICE reads Exchange Invest. And it's the one thing, and here's a quote actually from Jeff Sprecher himself. He's like, I don't know how this guy in Malta knows all this stuff about exchanges. He knows it before I do. I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. He's got all of our offices bugged and things like that. So it is a huge honor for me to be here. And just one other thing I'd like to mention before we get cracking so I was really honored to make the Exchange Invest Top 1000.
Yep.
And so my son, when that came out in 2017, he was 12 years old, and he read it cover to cover. And he would go through there and say, well, why aren't you ahead of this guy? Why aren't you ahead of this guy? So I'm sitting here with you now. I got to be ahead of those guys.
So there we have it, the word from Trabu Bland pointing out the fact of how do we do it? How do we manage to keep ahead of what's going on in the Bourse Business from our offices around the world? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's our secret sauce. but at the same as being our secret sauce, you too can join us as a subscriber. $300 right now. It's going up to $350 come the new year because inflation is ravaging us all. And let's face it, if your initials were SBF, you could have read what we said and saved yourself, wow, 25 billion, even during the middle of the summer, had you but been reading the exchange of information. Good evening. Let me say hello to some of our regular guests. Hello, Peter Secon. Lovely to see you this evening. I hope you're well. All the best to Ari. Les Calvert, great to see you too. Evening all. It is a delight to have you on the show, appearing as a regular viewer, Les. Really, really appreciate it. John T, good evening all. Looking forward to an intuitive and interesting reflection of 2022. Well, let's see. We've got 20 guests to come, John T. So hopefully it'll be highly inspiring. And indeed, let's move on towards our first guest of the evening. We're going to start with a carbon segment. As you may remember, we did several shows this year with my special guest presenter, carbon expert, Steve Zwick. When we were looking at this, we had a show, IPO-VID 52, Puro Carbon, NASDAQ Transforming Emissions. We brought the chairman of Puro Earth to our versatile distributed studio, and we enjoyed a discussion with the head of NASDAQ Stockholm, Fredrik Ekstrom.
The real revolution here is that we need to take engineered carbon removals or carbon removals in general from a couple of 100,000 of tons to 5-7 gigaton of removed carbon from the atmosphere. And that is a huge purpose on all of us to make sure that this happens. And that is the revolution.
So there we find ourselves with an incredible opening remark. The real revolution is all about carbon removal. We're going to hear from another guest shortly who's going to be explaining the same sort of thing. Quite incredible. The idea that we're going to move from hundreds or thousands of tons to 5 or 7 gigatons of removed carbon from the atmosphere. That's quite an incredible feat, and nonetheless a very exciting one, coming there from the boss of NASDAQ Stockholm, who's also the chairman of Puro Earth, itself a very, very interesting exchange-based definition of a carbon marketplace. The man who runs utility markets at the Intercontinental Exchange, a man who has a fantastic pedigree, of course, Gordon Bennett, not the same man as admittedly the Gordon Bennett of trophy races fame from the turn of the 20th century, or at least he certainly doesn't look that old. Gordon joined us for show ICE 051, ICE on the road to a global carbon price. Here are some thoughts from Gordon Bennett.
We've launched quite a lot of products over the cusp of the year in the renewable energy certificate space. So there's almost an insatiable demand for people to buy renewable electricity. That renewable energy certificate is how you prove that you bought that electricity. You know, when we're taking electricity off the grid, we're taking whatever's in the grid. So the only way to prove that you bought clean electricity is through your certificate. So there's going to be increasing demand for renewable energy certificates, as well as renewable PPAs, and so whether that's nature-based credit, Corsair credits, carbon removals. So we want to build a portfolio that gives people access to value as many positive externalities and negative externalities as they need to sort of navigate this move from economics to carbonomics.
The move to carbonomics, absolutely fascinating when you're pushing towards the insatiable demand in the renewable space. Very interesting how that compares and contrasts elegantly, but ultimately builds a bigger picture for the environmental markets going forward. And indeed, that brings us elegantly to our third guest, moving on from Gordon Bennett, the MD of Utility Markets at the Intercontinental Exchange. And we reach Air Carbon Exchange. Air Carbon had a cracking year as well. They just announced a fabulous new funding round out of the Middle East with Mubadala, the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund investing. Of course, they've got a huge office there as well in Abu Dhabi these days. But speaking to us from Singapore earlier in the year on Air Carbon's net zero mission, this was show number 50, was William Pazos.
there's just a lot of innovation that's across all of the markets. So we're in one part of the market where we're looking for standardization and bringing sort of transparency, ease of trading, price signals, bringing, as I said initially, traditional markets architecture. If you go and look into the weeds, it's super interesting what's happening on the technology front, for example. There are a lot of efforts out there to actually remove carbon from the atmosphere. Today, every ton of carbon that you remove from the atmosphere, if you believe those words in CCS, carbon capture and storage technology, can be as much as $400 a ton, right? So that's completely not scalable. But I remind you that in solar, for example, today you're looking at 5 to 8 cents kilowatt hours for solar energy, whereas just maybe a decade ago, you were talking about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So one of the things that will happen in the market is that we're going to scale very quickly into removals.
And if you're going to scale into those renewals and these whole renewables, which brings us back to what Frederick was saying, becomes very, very interesting. Note the emphasis on traditional market architecture. I think that's a comment that's aged incredibly well at the point in time when there's a lot of skepticism around this new thing of the digital world. And indeed, digital assets are going to really have to get their V2.0 mojo going in order to move forward. But nonetheless, look at that. What is it? Moore's Law, the equivalent or something like that in terms of how we advance the overall degree of the profitability, the efficiency of new inventions. And it's fascinating. Yep, that carbon capture of which we need maybe 7 or 9 gigatons, as was being mentioned earlier by Frederick, suddenly we're talking $400, not going to happen. However, if we can get that down to the kind of prices we're looking at in solar, 5 to 8 cents, that makes it a compelling proposition. At which point, I think the narrative moves on to continuing the renewable dialogue, holistic renewable energy and carbon. That was IPO-VID 55's topic, and it was with the head of markets at Expansive, another major player in this whole carbon markets gig, Henry Hasselknip.
Fuels. So the area that we are working very actively on right now, as I mentioned earlier, is in the space of methane performance certificates, differentiated natural gas. I think there's a huge potential for differentiated crude oil. But within the commodity markets, we tend to look at fuel products and gas and oil as sort of homogeneous products. And what we're looking to do here is sort of extract some of those intangibles and create sort of tradable certificates around that. So expect to see a lot of more of that coming our way, whether that's in the form of sort of methane performance certificates, digital natural gas, digital other fossil commodities. But that's a huge direction of travel, and we're seeing a big influx of capital to that space.
A big influx of capital coming into that space, whether it's in the form of methane performance certificates, all manner of other things that are going on around about this marketplace. Really, really interesting. And thus we end our first segment, which was, I think, a fabulous intervention of 4 terrific speakers that we had on our carbon series during the course of the year. My thanks again to Steve Vicks for being a really capable expert interviewer for the whole series of those particular shows. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to make a comment or you want to ask something, of course, you're more than welcome to do so at this point in time. Alas, it may not be possible for those who've been recorded in Pixel to manage to give you an answer directly, but nonetheless, I'm here and I'll be interested to hear your comments. And do please, please, please give us a little bit of love. A like goes a long way, whether you're watching us on LinkedIn or YouTube. I believe there's some sort of a problem with Facebook. It is not actually something we can deal with. We're being told by the engineering team that they're trying to deal with it further upstream in our provider. So hopefully we'll be back with Facebook soon. On the other hand, hopefully those people who are on Facebook have already switched to LinkedIn or YouTube in order to watch this show. Moving towards the business of more established exchanges, we had a great guest from Macedonia, the CEO of the Macedonian Stock Exchange, We discussed meeting a Southeastern European market builder, and that guest was Ivan Steriev.
Let me try to continue with the same logic. After some revolution in the different areas of the economy and the society, maybe the period of, let's say, calming down will occur. So maybe after so many, let's say, innovations and different, let's say, developments, maybe we will face the period in which we will speak about, let's say, evolution, not only a revolution, but of course, the capital markets will be globally preoccupied with the green economy, with ESG aspects, maybe about some specific IT aspects of functioning. I suppose that regulators will be more active in trying to find ways how to regulate these retail trading platforms, because, for example, what happened with Wall Street bets and GameStop, it's quite intriguing issue how to cope with that. So I think that first we will not have such a big revolutionary, let's say, developments, but on the other hand, I list few of them that will be priorities for both the business side but also the regulatory side. In our area of Europe, as I said, revolution will be to finally start to have consistently and permanently some of the normal developments in developed markets, like IPOs and more companies being on the public market.
Isn't it interesting that revolution for our emerging markets can actually look what is a distinct evolution in our established markets, talking about IPOs, giving all of the possibilities and the ways in which it makes it easier within a society to deliver those IPOs. And that remains a huge struggle. That struggle is very, very real, ladies and gentlemen, one with which Ivan Steriev is grappling every day as the former Yugosphere comes to terms with trying to develop its markets more and more. And of course, during the course of the year, Ivan Steriev's Macedonian Stock Exchange has created an even tighter bond in recent months with the Zagreb Stock Exchange, whose CEO, Ivana Gazic, we had the joy of speaking to last year. Now, moving on in the whole discussion, energy has been a huge topic throughout the course of the year. Right now, we sit on the cusp, of course, of a possible suicide move by the European Union, something that has been decried by everyone in the energy market. Most recently, just a few days ago, we had an epic email being sent out, a letter by the joint groups of all of the different industry associations, from central counterparty clearers all the way through the energy exchanges themselves. Previously, FESE, the stock exchanges, had said, do you really want to do this? It's a crisis out there. What we're going to see with an energy cap, I have no idea. But nonetheless, we were lucky enough in IPO-74 to have a man who himself has been a titan of building the European energy markets. The topic of his conversation was building sustainable commodity markets worldwide. How can an exchange build sustainable markets? Talking about what he thinks, or where he thinks, the capital market revolution will go next. It's the CEO of EEX, Peter Reitz.
Well, Patrick, I can't speak for the whole capital market, but the little piece that I'm looking at in the energy market, I think the energy market will develop to a great extent in a tool to decarbonize our
15
economy.
minutes, we've got 15 minutes.
And by that, I don't only mean the carbon market that we talked a lot about. Integrating renewable energy into the power market is a major task that we do every day. And I think that our energy markets will be completely decarbonized. Hydrogen, we haven't talked about that market, a very fascinating opportunity, will play a major role in that. We will see a global price of carbon, merging mandatory and voluntary carbon markets. And all of this will hopefully help to save the planet. That at least is our mission.
So way back in the 1960s, there was that fantastic film which launched the career of Dustin Hoffman, The Graduate. At that point in time, they told him the future was plastics. Nowadays, the future seems to be anti-plastic. But what's the solution? Is it methane capture? Is it going to be carbon capture itself? Or indeed hydrogen power, let alone solar power? Fascinating insight so far from all of the energy and related carbon markets. Let's switch gears a little and go into the technology world. Keith Todd, the CEO of Trading Technologies, IPO-VID 66, delivering SaaS through Trading Technologies. It's Keith Todd.
Well, it's clear that the definition of next is really critical. And I just want to go not in the next 5 years, but the next decade. What I see in the capital markets is an inequality in terms of the customers of the capital markets, where scale matters, and that the what I would call the commoditization of the capital markets capabilities and infrastructure to trade any asset is going to be the big mega trend over the next decade, and it could be the next 2 decades, where what we've seen to a degree in the equity marketplace is where the cost of trading equities has come down so dramatically, the cost of clearing is going to happen across the whole plethora. And this won't just be a marketplace for the large organizations, the big funds. It will be a marketplace for all consumers to participate in at some level on, frankly, a rational economic cost. So I think the future is that the democratization of them, the commoditization of trading to make it cost effective. And the reason I say that is because technology can facilitate that. Technology can lower the cost. Think about Microsoft and what it's done to your features and functions on your PCs, and obviously there's others as well. Actually brought what were features and functions only available for the larger enterprises 20 years ago are now available to all of us, Google included, providing these capabilities. So the commoditization, the democratization of capital markets to really make it a revolution for everybody, not just for a few.
Comrade, I would have to say, Keith Todd, how fantastic to hear a comrade in arms talking about the revolution in such a wildly exciting and vibrant way. The commoditization, the democratization of markets, most importantly, seeing his own role as a cost-effective gatekeeper, allowing the distribution to markets. Quite splendid. And also I would applaud Keith for something he said in the wake of the FTX scandal. He was actually quoted in various media as a result of it. He was discussing the demise of the SBF fraud at FTX, and Keith added a splendid mot juste to the whole shambles. As fast as the FIA could whitewash the FTX sponsor logos from the Chicago Conference Hall. Keith said, there are a few people in the industry that need to think hard about how someone can appear from nowhere and become the primary sponsor when others have been around for 20 plus years. This is a wake-up call. The adults need to run this industry. We need innovators, but also adults. Speaking of adults, it was absolutely fantastic. It was the middle of the night in Sydney, but nonetheless, he joined us just ahead of flying back to Astana, where he's the Chief Operating Officer of the Astana International Exchange. Building better markets all over the world was the topic of IPO-80 just a few weeks ago, and it was my delight to welcome a man who has built probably more exchanges than anybody else alive at this moment, Olivier Guéris.
Frontier markets. The last frontier. I think there's still like there's 25, 28 countries in the world that don't have a stock exchange. That's where the future take place. And also it's still largely untapped areas in Africa, in Central America, Central Asia as well. So that's why I see massive potential for growth.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Olivier says, it's a world of opportunity, huge possibilities in the frontier markets, Africa, all around the Middle East, all sorts of places in Central America, Central Asia. Makes me hugely excited because at this moment, what is the ultimate model for e-commerce? Ladies and gentlemen, it's the time-honored, old, thousands of year old model. We call it the exchange. Now, who's going to power those exchanges? Well, of course, that's a very interesting technology conversation. We had Keith Todd discussing how he can manage to provide the linkage between the investors and the exchanges themselves. But it was a delight to look at the whole concept of Expiry building cloud-based exchanges. And to that end, we heard from their CEO, Guy Melamed.
I mean, the last research that I read said that the tier ones and the tier twos of national stock exchanges will move to the cloud only around 2026 till 2028. I believe that in the coming 12 to 24 months, we will see most of the tier ones and the tier twos move to the cloud already. Okay, we will see this innovation using also cloud-based matching engine, native matching engines, which are cloud-based. We'll see them integrated already. Today, having Expiry is the only one out there, but hopefully we'll see that evolve. I believe we will see more and more DLT-based settlement solutions. I want to see the diversification of instruments in the coming year, and I want to see the diversification of markets by having young and enthusiastic entrepreneurs being able to launch their markets with solutions like Expiries and more, because we make it available and we make it applicable for the smallest markets and the most big and traditional markets.
Fascinating. A bridge between the new entrepreneurs. Bring them on. If you need help building an exchange, send us a message. We'll be happy to do so. That's what we're here to be, an agency for the creation of value through new markets the world over, and we've built them ourselves. Powered by technology such as Expiry. What an interesting possibility as the diversification of markets explodes, all the way through to seeing the very, very largest of exchanges heading to the cloud. And indeed, just today, confirmation that the first market of NASDAQ's US exchange bundle, or at least one of their options exchanges, has actually now gone live in the cloud itself. Fascinating discussion we had with Guy Melamed all those months ago. That brings us to a further issue, of course, because you spew out a lot of data. How do you manage to understand it? What can you do with it? What are the bounds in this era? Well, who better than a man who manages to canoe through a 15 petabyte lake of data every day? The Chief Product Officer of BMLL. He came along to discuss liquidity maps, the data Magna Carta. It's Dr. Elliot Banks.
Well, look, I think 10 years ago, it was all talk of speed.
Yes.
I think where we now are, and really with the growth of adoption of cloud and the ability for people to actually process and consume this data, means the race is really on for data and for information. And I think the wealth and the vastness of information means that more and more focus is going to be on using this information to actually, affect trading decisions, or affect how your venue works, or affect, the ultimate decision of how, say, your algorithm behaves. And I think what we're going to see is a real continued demand for not only data points themselves, but data that's in a relevant, useful way that people can ultimately use to help them better make decisions.
Fine art of distilling all of that data, distilling the data down in order to manage to help the trader, the investor, make better decisions. That's at the heart of the whole concept of what is the BMLL liquidity map. And it was a joy to be able to go to London and actually sit right beside Dr. Elliot Banks for that discussion. Now we're halfway through the show, ladies and gentlemen. We've got 10 segments to go. We're basically 30 minutes into the program as well. How perfect is that for timing so far? Well done, production team. It's a very exciting conversation. I hope you're enjoying this, discussing where the revolution will go next as we review the year through highlights of the IPO-VID series. Please do give us a little bit of love. Please also send us a question, send us a comment. We'll be delighted to hear from you as we go from the wonderful world of data to discussing all manner of issues in relation to exchanges and also inflation. We had two fabulous guests on during the course of IPO-VID 56. Alan Swimmer, Managing Director at Horizon Kinetics LLC, was also joined by James Davalos, who's a portfolio manager at Horizon Kinetics. He specifically runs the portfolio itself of the inflation product. And my goodness, how 6 months ago that seemed like, well, a bit of an eccentricity. And all of a sudden, it's center stage in every investor's portfolio concerns. Okay, there we were, ahead of the game once again. Let's go over to hear a little bit from, first, Alan Swimmer.
Look, I think there's a lot of interesting things going on here. The business environment now, and one of the things away from inflation that I talk about is when I was in the got in the futures business in 1984 with the great Dr. Sander, who's a friend of yours, I know. There was open outcry, and there was a lot of, it was sort of the beginning of financial futures. There was a lot of money being put towards it. There was a lot of highly intelligent people trading in the pits. There was a lot of not very intelligent people trading in the pits, and there was a lot of money swishing around. I think we're sort of at that same place now in the crypto and blockchain space, where there's lots of resources being put towards crypto and blockchain. There's lots of very smart, highly skilled people participating. There's a lot of people that have very little experience also making lots of money in that space. But I think with the adoption and additional, I'd say, regulation over the next several years, I think you're going to see a convergence of, crypto and blockchain start to be, more widely accepted globally. And I think
Gosh, look at that, just a matter of months ago. And at that point in time, a lot of people would have been scratching their head at Alan's very prescient remark about there's a lot of unintelligent money has gone into crypto. Well, of course, they all looked like geniuses then. I wonder how many FTX tokens they have to their name these days in place of proper hard cash, like the US dollar, which once again has survived the year as the world's reserve currency. Fabulous to hear from Alan. Also great to hear mention of Dr. Richard Sander. Richard, if you're watching this, we're hoping to come to Chicago next year to interview you because you are the father of financial futures, and we'd really, really like to do that show in person in your great and wonderful adopted hometown of Chicago. Now, moving on, let me just say a couple of things before we get to James Davalos. We're going to come to his remarks on inflation in a moment. I want to say thank you very much. First of all, hiya to Anthony Clancy. Anthony, it's lovely to see you watching once again this evening. Good evening to you, and evening all to everybody. And Patrick. Well, hi, great to see you all together. Fabulous question came in actually from John T. John T is asking about, well, he's looking forward to the exchange-less gaps being filled soon. To do that, do these gaps filling exchanges have to be located in the gaps themselves, or can they operate remotely from elsewhere? Great question, John T. Look, at the end of the day, exchanges in the modern digital age can operate from everywhere. What they need to have, though, is clearly a sensible, coherent regulatory framework. That has to be something which is not too prescriptive, but at the same time gives investors confidence. Because what do we need in an exchange? Trust. What's the other thing we need in exchange? We need all human life to be there. So they must be able to access the market, whether it's coming across borders, wherever it's going to be. And let's face it, don't forget what's happening right at this point in time. The majority of trades in a vast number of markets across Europe, called Euronext, they're all taking place in Lake Como, or Lake Bergamo, actually, to be precise, in a data center over there. They're not actually happening in Paris or Amsterdam or Brussels, where those exchanges are located. Equally, vast numbers of trades in the New York Stock Exchange don't take place in New York. They're taking place up the road in New Jersey, in the famous places like Mahwah, one of the data data center sort of epicenters of the entire world. So the point about the exchanges gaps are there are many. The second point about the exchanges gaps are there is an opportunity to fill them. And I remain super excited because this is the business model of the future. Thank you, John T. I hope that helps answer your question. If you've got a follow-up, come back to me. All comments are welcome if anybody wants to chat to us on this live show this evening. At the same time, let's hear more about inflation and go to James Davolos.
Everything with decentralized finance and all of these other blockchain-based applications. But I think taking a step back and looking at our industry, if the preconditions for the 10% return for the 60-40 portfolio since the early mid-1980s is gone, what is going to happen if you cannot just kind of latch on to that bond and equity portfolio? I think that there's going to have to be a lot of creativity out there in where we can source returns. And it's not things that are really out there today. I don't know. I think the exchanges are going to play a pivotal point here in product evolution, structured products, different types of futures and option strategies. But people are going to have to get very creative because right now the status quo of what traditional liquid capital markets are offering people, it does not solve the problems of individual savers, pensions, endowments, sovereigns, you name it. So I think it's exciting to see what people are going to come up with over the next.
Really fascinating point. Once again, we've got the possibility that there's a huge area of product development. So it goes back to John T's point. I mean, these aren't just markets that are not being serviced, like say, for example, a nation which doesn't have a stock exchange yet. These are just niche products that are going to deliver the opportunities for people. What do we know about financial centers? The interesting thing about an industrial park is you open it up, effectively, you're taking jobs from somewhere else in some way, shape, or form because there's a finite number of, for example, cars that people are going to manage to want to own, washing machines, all sorts of industrial products. The same with financial centers, we get something totally different. The simple fact of the matter is we've never yet exhausted the demand for financial centers because each and every one can create its own niches, its own opportunities. And similarly, what are we talking about? Young's pyramid. Remember that, my drawing that represents the world of exchanges. And that is growing at the bottom. Why? Because more and more people are finding more interesting possibilities, products, etc. Let's face it, 25 years ago, people laughed at the idea we were going to be trading electricity futures. You look at it today, we've got electricity futures right across the world. And now we've got all these fascinating byproducts, carbon, etc., coming off them. James makes the great point there that what we're looking at is the opportunity to fill holes in the established financial product gap. And that's something, for example, with an aging population in much of the developed world, that's going to become much, much more important going forward, as we saw, for example, when the UK gilts market had a big whoops nasty moment just a month or so ago, plainly because the Bank of England was not up with the developments in that market and how it ultimately was incredibly focused on quantitative easing and wasn't delivering the right product match for people with pensions. One person who doesn't have a pension full on, but is nonetheless a stalwart of this industry and someone with great experience across the board. He's a King's Counsel. He was a Queen's Counsel when we interviewed him, because of course the tragedy of this year was the death of Her Royal Highness, Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen in charge of the Commonwealth and the United Kingdom for an incredible period of the post-war era. Anyway, we had a partner from Hassan's, the international law firm, who are the leading law firm in the Rock of Gibraltar itself, a fascinating, dynamic financial centre in which, of course, I'm proud to be playing a very, very minor role going forward through Valerian PLC. Nigel Feetham, KC, FinTech Renaissance man.
I think that the revolution in Gibraltar will continue. In other words, we are just scratching the surface. I really firmly believe that in the digital space, Gibraltar is just scratching the surface, and not just Gibraltar, but I think everyone else. This is a revolution that will continue. If we compare this to the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, or the Renaissance period lasted for well over 100 years. And I have no doubt that this revolution will really revolutionize the sector and will continue for a very, very long time. A point that I have made in the past is that nobody is late to this party. We will, in Gibraltar, continue to see the space growing. We will also, I think, see operators coming to Gibraltar and bridging that gap between the traditional financial services sector and the digital asset and crypto market. Whoever achieves that, I think, will have a huge market share going forward. I believe that Gibraltar is very well placed to take advantage of that for all the reasons that I've said. And let me also point out, Patrick, that in Gibraltar, we have a very proactive government of Gibraltar, not just a proactive regulator, but a very proactive government that is led by a chief minister of Gibraltar that understands the financial services sector very well. He's also a QC, like I am. He's worked in this sector in the past for a number of years, and he's really attuned to the needs of business.
Doing business, getting business done, execution, and digitize, digitize, digitize. That's the message from the Rock of Gibraltar. And let's face it, they've had a trading port there for literally thousands of years, which makes it quite spectacular as a commercial entrepot to relate and interact with the world. Once upon a time, a physical node. Nowadays, it's becoming an important digital node, whether on the blockchain or just on the other non-distributed electronic networks. Thank you so much, Nigel Feetham, now KC, for your fantastic, passionate discussion of the merits of Gibraltar and the way forward over the 100-year Renaissance. Good grief, the revolution's going to last another 75 years yet at this rate of the capital market revolution. Let me say one thing, ladies and gentlemen. If you're enjoying this show at this point in time, then do me a favor. Send us a little love and a like. Subscribe to this channel. Better still, if you want to understand, if you want to be ahead of what goes on in the world of exchanges, you need the exchange of information. You heard from our very first video, Jeffrey Sprecher, who was voted the most influential man in exchanges in the course of the first EI 1000 index. He was saying, ultimately, he doesn't know how we do it. I'm not going to tell you that secret sauce, but I'm going to tell you something. We're going to be ahead of the curve throughout the course of 2023, and ahead of that curve in 2022 meant telling you that the ASX's tech upgrade was doomed, meant telling you that FTX could be in deep, deep trouble. And actually, we were the first people to come out and say, that's it. We believe FTX is holed below the waterline, days before anybody else was willing to come out and make that sort of analysis, because we understand markets like no other digital newsletter on the planet. So like us, subscribe to this channel, and ideally ping us a DM and come forward, take up a month's free trial and subscribe. $300 before year end, $350 for next year. Okay, we got a very, very interesting question come in. We're now at the 3/4 mark of our videos for this evening with an incredible 14 down, 6 to go. So I suppose we're actually closer to a Fibonacci level of about 61.8% if you want to think about it that way. Anthony Clancy, in your expert opinion, do you see more issues with the crypto exchanges currently in the marketplace, which will pave the way for the regulatory exchange age of the future? Yes, absolutely, completely and totally, 1 billion%. We've been leveraging ourselves against a few FTX tokens with that previous hyperbole. Yes, there's no argument whatsoever. We've got to go towards a regulated age. Now, what I find totally weird at the moment actually is I don't believe that there fundamentally needs to be such an incredibly different set of regulations for the crypto exchanges, for the digital asset exchanges going forward. I think that has actually been to some degree an element of foolishness. Ultimately, I think things are going to be somewhat like the B2B exchange revolution of the dot-com bubble, the V1.0 of the dot-com era itself. What we saw there was actually the B2B exchanges ultimately ended up in the established exchange universe. And I think you're going to see something very, very similar like that. At the moment, the most important thing to say is there's a big, big risk of contagion right across all of the crypto V1.0 exchanges. I don't want to talk anybody down per se, but all I can say is DYOR, do your own research. There are huge risks out there, and those people who haven't already been investing heavily in digital assets, I think have a huge opportunity to manage to come in and be well positioned for V2.0 of crypto. You might remember, actually, Anthony, I wrote an article saying basically that Bitcoin was dead, long live cryptocurrency, several months ago in City AM. Didn't really catch the summer zeitgeist because a lot of people thought, that's a weird thing to be saying. We're just about to exit crypto winter. And look how things were. That was only crypto autumn. Now we're hitting crypto winter. And I think it potentially could get much, much worse still for many of the protagonists, because there's a lot of waves that are going to overwhelm even some perfectly reasonable businesses. But overall, what do we need here? We need trust. How do we get trust? We need decent, sensible, coherent regulation and organizations which are themselves transparent in how they go about their business. From there, we will see a huge new wave of highly profitable exchanges. Young's pyramid will grow, and indeed, the world of investment will be all the better for our future, coming up to 8 billion citizens of the world. Thank you very much for the question, Anthony. It's really a joy to see you all together. So we reach a very interesting pointer where we had a fabulous discussion with the chairman of the Dalmore Group. He's one of the leading figures in the US in crowdfunding. Of course, last year we had the godfather of crowdfunding in the US himself on the show. Let's hear about success in the US alphabet of crowdfunding looking forward with Ethan Butler.
I think everything's going to be fractionalized. Physical assets, I think real estate, yield offerings. I think that the incredible growth amongst the NFTs, right? I think there was close to $90 million of NFTs that were issued in 2020, and I think 25 billion or so in 2021. I think more and more of these digital securities and physical securities are going to be going through the Reg A channel, so that anyone over 18 could participate and buy shares in them. And so I think that's going to continue. It's digitizing the process, removing paper exchange, allows for companies to go through the primary issuance process to offer their shares to the masses, and also facilitate secondary market trading of the private securities. And I think that's we're just at the early innings of the industry here. I think that's going to continue.
Absolutely spot on from Ethan Butler. Note he's talking again about removing paperwork, digitization, making markets more efficient, and this whole zeitgeist of the crowdfunding industry bringing us forward down to the level of giving the opportunity for everybody to be investing in a more direct way into the future prosperity of our society. It just makes me so excited, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why I love getting your love and your messages, because we need to get this message about exchanges out there, and we need more people reading Exchange Invest, watching these videos, in order to understand how pivotal and vital the exchange world is. Exchange Invest as the exchange of information within it, and indeed organizations such as Dalmore Group. I take my hat off to Ethan Butler. Absolutely fabulous business he's been building there. And also, by the way, I'm with him. Very, very optimistic for the future of NFTs. There's some great excitement in there. Thank you very much, LinkedIn user. Fantastic summary, Patrick. So glad to have the opportunity to be part of your network. Well, thank you very much. It's absolutely a joy to be there and be here talking to you today with all this fabulous cornucopia of genius around me. I mean, absolutely superb. We still got 5 to go this evening. And equally, we've got Anthony Clancy. Thanks, Patrick, for an excellent answer. You are very welcome, Anthony. Thank you so much for your support during the course of the year. Absolutely a joy. And before we go to John Kim, I'm going to quickly talk to Ian Miller. Hi, all. When will the GSX be live with Valerium, which has now been accepted by the GFSC? No change to the plans at this point in time. If there had been a change of plans, we would have been making an RNS. At this point, we are on target. As you will remember, we have the change of control has been agreed by the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission. Equally, the change of management, the change of board has been agreed. And indeed, yours truly will be stepping into the exciting hot seat as the managing director, chief executive, however you want to refer to it. In regulator speak, we call him the executive director of the Gibraltar Stock Exchange going forward. It's going to be a very exciting year in 2023. It's going to be a particularly exciting year for Valerium PLC, Gibraltar, and the Gibraltar Stock Exchange. We can't wait to get in there and start moving the project even faster forward during the course of 2023. Thank you for the question, Ian. Great to hear from you. While we're talking about all of those sorts of issues around about NFTs and things like that with Ethan Butler, although he's also very much strongly in the core of the crowdfunding movement, we were touching upon the whole idea of CBDC, central bank digital currency, and the future of money during the course of IPO-72. And the man who joined us for that was the Chief Strategy Officer and General Counsel of Movement. They've been developing some fascinating CBDCs around the world, including the Bahamian Sand Dollar for the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Let's hear from John Kim.
There's a saying, I'm paraphrasing here in economics, by the American economist Rudy Dornbush, about how in economics things always change a lot slower than you think they can, and then suddenly they change a lot faster than you thought they ever could. I kind of feel like that with something like CBDCs. Right now, all the headlines are being are focused around cryptocurrencies generally, but as with a lot of these things, the central bank digital currencies will, truth be told, be much more transformative, in my opinion, in the coming years. The survey by the BIS is no joke. 30% of central banks, representing 90% of the global GDP, are looking to implement their own CBDCs in 1 to 3 years, and 68% within the next 6 years. That is a relatively compact period of time. China has been piloting this their DCEP.
Fascinating. We've got this whole issue here. Listen to those numbers. The survey by the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, the Bankers Bank, ladies and gentlemen, 30% of central banks. That's a big number in a world of 200 odd nations, but they're representing 90% of global GDP. And they're looking to implement their own CBDCs in the course of the next 1 to 3 years. 68% of those, I mean, well within a normal standard deviation, are going to talk about doing it within the course of the next 6 years. That is a huge move towards digital money, and that's going to be a revolutionary factor across all of our traded asset markets. Thanks so much to John Kim for also being such a great guest on the show. Let me just say hi there to Jonathan Butler. Good to see you, Jonathan. Thank you very much for joining us in. Jonathan, an old exchange hand in his own right, going back many decades, and also making the excellent quip, what an excellent surname, says Jonathan Butler to his namesake, the Dalmore chairman, Ethan Butler. Thanks very much for your comment there, Jonathan. Equally, I've got to say, yeah, Ian Miller is looking forward to you running the show for the executive director of GSX PLY. It's an amazing time to be entering the new dawn of crypto 2.0 for sure. I totally agree, and it's super fantastically supercalifragilisticexpialidociously exciting to be on the cusp of this all happening in. Really, really terrific altogether. And let me also just say, finally, thank you very much, Anthony Clancy. I'm glad you love the insight to the NFT values. What's the key future of NFTs? It isn't pixels, it's physical stuff, and using the backbone of that ledger in order to manage to prove what is being sold. When it comes to proving things that are being sold or not sold, we had a great conversation in IPO-VID 60 after Brexit. We're next for world trade, and we joined the fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy for that discussion, Catherine McBride.
Oh, the capital market. I was going to add to that, that is the industry that is so often overlooked because it's not a sort of financial service and it's not a sort of, car production. But the UK is incredibly good and always has been at the production of media, books, films, TV. They sell it all around the world. Obviously, it's helped by the English language. And now we've got so many of the podcasts going out all over the world as well.
We were framed by that fabulous UK addiction to media, a great industry, and of course, the capital markets. Born, honed, raised in terms of my career in the world's biggest, most diverse financial centre, which remains the City of London, post-Brexit, no Brexit, whatever. Great to hear from Catherine McBride there. Now, of course, one of the things that Brexit has had is a huge amount of hot air. At the same time, we joined an IPO-VID 64, Tom McMahon. He was energising new markets, another established energy market builder all across the world, co-founder and CEO of Air Carbon Exchange. We heard from William Pazos earlier. Here's Tom McMahon.
The life of it's generational, I think we're seeing, we hear these conversations around the concept of digital money, right? The rhetoric around, that it's already done and it's done at generational. I think if you talk to anybody below the age of 30, it's like, yeah, and they've actually probably never. So I mean, I think the argument it's obviously it's a mature conversation. It can't be just be done rebelliously, but I think the adoption of the what we are calling the digital revolution is already done. And I think if you look at like a country like Indonesia, where more than 50% of the population is below the age of 30, 295 million people. It's so embedded and it's so natural in their day-to-day. And it's still an emerging nation. It's still got very rural areas, but they're all interconnected digitally, right? So electronic payments is a foregone conclusion. So I think really that is, probably the most significant thing. So that argument of, the CBDC, right? The whole concept of a central bank digital currency and everything. We electronified money, a decade ago, right? We electronified stocks. We dematerialized them 2 decades ago. Right? No one questions that. So that's really where I think it's just really, it's market adoption at a generational level.
Market adoption at a generational level. And of course, the important thing about that is how you disrupt Exchange Data internationally, which brought us to IPO 65 with the CEO of Exchange Data International, Jonathan Block.
Oh, I think there's going to be a lot of innovation. If you look back at the last 10 years, the growth of things like exchange-traded funds, which have really taken over from active management. There's been a general move towards passive investment through things like exchange-traded funds, which in the US market particularly are much more tax beneficial than other vehicles. There'll be a lot more innovation like that. New types of instruments, perhaps even new types of exchanges, different tax treatments of instruments. So I see continual innovation. Some of it will be related to digital securities, but some of it won't. Some of it will be straight vanilla capital markets.
Brilliant surmise of what we're looking at for the future of markets there from our good friend of this show, which it was so good to see, Jonathan Block. And still on the data topic, let's go to Mark Schiddle, CEO of Data BP.
Well, from a data perspective, I think the business that I just talked about will look more like a media business. I think the way we interact with, I mentioned this earlier in the discussion, the way we interact with media and consume media will look a lot like how we interact with data. It will become part of the fabric of how we inform ourselves, right? That media provides us information about the markets over broadcast networks. It will be powering up our daily interactions with those markets, provide us insights and ways to form our competitive advantage, which is the way markets have always worked and will continue to work. It will be based upon our ability to consume and action unique insights from information and extracting those either faster, more insightfully than the next person.
It's a really, really fascinating series of insights that come to us from Mark Schiddle. And that brings us round circle, a whole new opportunity to hear once again from Prabhu Bland, the SVP of Futures Exchanges at ICE, when he was discussing as Master of ICE Futures. Prabhu Bland.
I had an instant answer for this when you gave me a heads up on the question, and I'm going to continue with that. So Mark Andreessen said, had a very famous quote. He said, software is eating the world. But if you really look at what's going on right now, its markets are going to eat the world. And we're going to see a lot more markets pricing things. That's, when you look at Web3, that is really building in markets to price things that, what's the price of my attention span on a social network? What's the price that that they're willing to spend for your, participation in any network? That's where these markets were going to take over the world. And I think that's a really interesting place, and an interesting place for ICE to be.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Clancy, my apologies. I'm going to come to your question next week in our second roundup show. I'd also like to thank all of our commenters this evening: John T., Anthony Clancy, Peter Secon, Les Calvert, Ian Miller, Batty Young, Jonathan Butler, amongst those who've talked to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, markets are going to eat the world. Are you with Exchange Invest? Like, subscribe to this channel right now. Part 2 of this summary of the year is going to be coming same place, same time next week. Have a great week in life, blockchain and markets. And thanks very much to my production team, Herminia, Marianne, Beata and Jake. Great effort this evening, folks. Take care. And remember, markets are eating the world.